Warren P. Strobel is a diplomatic correspondent in Reuters' Washington Bureau, responsible for investigative and enterprise reporting on national security and foreign policy issues. He's covered foreign and security issues for more than 3 decades, focused most recently on the investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 presidential election. And Jonathan Landay is a reporter for Reuters covering national security. He has written about foreign affairs and U.S. defense, intelligence, and foreign policies for more than 30 years. In his current position, he covers intelligence and defense issues, terrorism, nuclear weapons, and arms control policies, and focuses on U.S. foreign policy towards Europe, South Asia, and the Middle East. Please welcome Jonathan Landay and Warren P. Strobel. And finally, a very warm welcome to the director of the film, Mr. Rob Reiner. Check. There we go. Mr. Reiner, thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
What a pleasure to be here. How does it feel like to be hovering over you?
You did that the entire time.
That's a director's job, I think.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Reiner, congratulations on the film. A wonderful story and a message that still seems very, very relevant today. Why did you want to tell this film now?
Well, you know, I actually wanted to tell the story right at the time that it first happened in 2003. I was a draft day for the Vietnam War, and I just couldn't believe that in my lifetime, our government was going to be sending us to war based on lies, two times. And so when we first debated, I mean, there's a line I think that Warren's character, played by James Marsden, says in the film that you feel like the kid is sitting out in the street, and you're the parent, you feel helpless to stop them from getting hit by the truck, and that's what I felt like, that we were marching to war, there was no way to stop it, and I knew it was based on lies, and so initially I tried to put together, like, I guess it was like a satire. I hired Larry Gelbart. We were going to do like a Dr. Strangelove kind of thing. And that didn't work. I never got a script I liked. Then I tried another dramatic version. It didn't work. And then years later, I saw this documentary by Bill Moyers. And if you remember, his quote is right at the beginning of the film. And in the film, in this documentary, he interviewed the 4 guys from Night Ritter. I went, oh, this is the way into this film. And in fact, if I didn't know anything about the article they had written, and I knew basically everything that was going on, and I basically had come to the same conclusions that they had come to, and I said, this is the way to tell the story. So I was lucky that I had both Jonathan and Warren, and also Joe Galloway and John Walcott involved in helping us craft the script. They were there every day when we were doing the stuff with the journalists and kept us on the straight and narrow.
Gentlemen, you've done so much reporting over your careers before and after the story portrayed in the film, but does this story hold a certain importance to you, or is it a special for you in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was perhaps the most important work we'll do, although I have to say, I don't want to make a sort of value judgment on the President of the United States right now, but I will say that he and his administration have a very odd relationship with the truth and the work that we're doing, not to have an opinion on him, not to be against him, but to hold him accountable and to point out when he's not telling the truth is really important as well.
I think the film is timely for that reason. You know, here we are, we were joking actually when I was joking with my partner when I got here that perhaps I needed to claim political asylum in Canada because we've been denounced as enemies of the people. The attack on our institution, which probably right now is the least dysfunctional institution in our country, is unprecedented. And I think that this film, what this film tells you is what we do every day in trying to, tell the truth, try and break through the lies that we get every day, because every time a lie is told and it's believed, it diminishes the quality of our democracy. And that's why this kind of journalism now is so much more, is as critical as it was when we were doing the reporting in 2001, 2002, 2003. I should say that what Rob focused on was the reporting we did in the lead up to the war, but we actually spent about 3.5 to 4 years going back and exposing the use of the bogus defectors, the bogus intelligence.
The lack of serious war planning as well.
The lack of war planning, the false assumptions that were made, the fake and false and bogus information that was planted in the Western press by Mr. Chalabi and his Iraqi National Congress that the American taxpayers were paying for. And so, we've seen a change in the technology that is used to convey, the platforms that are used to convey the journalism that we do, but the way we do the journalism is still the same.
Now, the New York Times and other institutions are sort of taken to task in the film for their biased reporting at the time. How do you, I guess you sort of just touched on it, but how do you view the current state of journalism in the United States today? And do you think the truth is being reported?
We live in such a polarized society that we have in the United States. I have to say, I believe that the New York Times and the Washington Post and other news organizations that failed in our story have actually stepped up to the task of being pretty tough on the Trump administration, of done some really good investigative work on the Trump-Russia investigation, on the numerous scandals at the EPA and so forth. The problem is we're in such a polarized society, at least in the United States, that 50% of people consume that, but there's another 38, 40% who believe that is, quote, fake news, and they consume an entirely different stream of information from Fox News and Breitbart and so forth. And how do you reach those people? And just real quickly, and then on top of that, you have an administration which is trying to say that actually there is no reality, there is no objective fact except what I say is objective fact. And that's really scary, because that's, to me, how a sort of autocracy and dictatorship start.
Mr. Reiner, the films produced are often a reflection of the anxieties of the times. And in the last few years, we've seen some wonderful films about the role of journalism in society, from films like Spotlight to The Post to your film. What do you think, as a director, is the power of film to perhaps open people's minds or bring these issues forward?
Well, I mean, it has its place. I mean, it's part of the conversation. I hope it can throw a light onto what is going on right now, because I do believe that right now, as we all sit here, the press has a much bigger role and a much more important role than at any time in American history. Because right now, democracy is under attack, not just in America, but all around the world. And what we're facing with this administration, and maybe Warren and Jonathan can't say it, but I can certainly say it, is something that we've never seen before in this country. We have a liar who continually lies, has no understanding of how government works or how policy intersects with politics, and he is in line with dictators throughout the world. He is trashing not only the press and calling it the enemy of the people, but he's also trashing Western-style democracies all over the world. So we're right now in a very critical time as to whether or not democracy is going to survive, and the press is the one institution that can hold this guy accountable. And there's a line that my character, that John Walcott, delivers in the film, which to me is the most important line, which is when the government says something, you only have one question to ask. Is it true? And right now, the truth is under attack, because what goes on there at Fox and Sinclair, I don't know if you read today, but Sinclair's putting out this edict that people have to toe the line of Donald Trump. This is authoritarianism, and this is the first time in American history where a president of the United States is backed up essentially by state-run media. So the truth and the people who are really fighting hard to get the truth out are really got some headwinds, and it's more important now than ever. So we just have to keep fighting, and people like Jonathan and Warren and John Walcott and the people at McClatchy and the New York Times and the Washington Post and NBC and CNN, they have to fight very hard, because we're not guaranteed to have democracy. Fascism has a way of raising its ugly head, and you can see it right now at the border. They're pushing this kind of xenophobia and this racism about the other, and blaming the other for all the ills in this country. And we know that there's not an immigration crisis. It's trumped up. It was trumped up in Nazi Germany and Brexit and in all those places. So the press right now is under attack, and we have to stay firm if we're going to have democracy survive.
Warren and Jonathan, I think another thing the film sort of highlights is the fact that these trusted news organizations and stuff that people take to be delivering fact can sometimes not be 100% trustworthy. What advice would you give to people who struggle to see through what is fact and what is not when it comes to reporting?
I think a couple of things. First of all, the internet gives you, there's two sides to the internet. You know, there's the dark side, as I refer to it, which enables the government to deliver its version of reality directly to people without going through what used to be the way, which was, the government would say something and you would have what we hope were, and were, subject matter experts who would be able to say, this is true, this is not quite true, this is wrong, and those were journalists. Now the government and corporations and anyone can use the internet to bypass those filters and deliver their twisted information and dangerous information directly to the consumers, whether it be whatever administration's in the White House. Rob has said before when we've talked in public that every administration, every president puts out propaganda. That's just the way all governments are. But in this case, you have a different version of reality that's being delivered through the internet by InfoWars and Breitbart. But then you have the more powerful side, and the side I think that holds promise, and that's the ability to give consumers a wide choice of outlets from which to consume their information, but also it gives the consumer the ability to fact check what they're being told, because you, as consumers, can go directly to the statistics that are put out by the government or by by whoever, and measure that against what you're seeing it being delivered by journalists. Do your own research. Go back and dig out your own facts. I know there's a premium on time in our modern age, but nevertheless, the internet excuse me, the internet gives you the ability to do that. So I would say that it's more important now than ever for people to be able to go to as many sources as possible for their information, but also to do their own reporting. And you see a lot of that now in blogs and vlogs and what have you, and then challenge what you're seeing. You have the ability to do that now on the comments on the bottom of articles, or you can email. Our email addresses go on the bottoms of all of our articles. You email the reporters directly and say, no, this is wrong, or hold us accountable the same way you would hold the government accountable.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we might open it up to the audience now. So if anyone has a question, we have people in both aisles with microphones, so just raise your hand. I see a hand up back there. Yeah, all the way at the top there. Sorry, make you walk all the way up there. Where? All the way under the exit sign there.
Sneakers. Thank you. Amazing movie, great job. My name is Siobhan. I just had a question. You know, they say that those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Do you think we remember enough, or are we poised to make similar mistakes? Like, how did, thousands of migrant children get ripped out of their parents' arms before we got outraged? Are we poised to still make those same mistakes?
I think we are. I mean, like I said, in my lifetime, I saw us march to war based on all lives twice. And right now, you've got, some major propaganda being, pushed out at us. And I think people, like Jonathan says, you have to work a little bit to find, what's true and what's not true. And, it's easy to feed a lot of lies to people if you keep reinforcing it. And it's much easier to spread lies than it is to get to the truth. That's the thing about, a lie, works its way around the world before the truth gets its hands on. I mean, that's a true thing. And for the other side, all you have to do is say fake news, witch hunt, no collusion, and that's all. You repeat that over and over and over again. But to explain to people what the collusion is about, to explain to people that they're the fake news and that the truth tellers are not the fake news is very difficult. So yes, it can happen. I mean, look what happens and you talk about this, this crisis with kids being separated from their children. The mayor of New York City, de Blasio, didn't even know there were 250 kids in New York City being tucked away and hidden. And he's the mayor of this city, so it's very hard. The government, it's hard to hold the government accountable, especially when they have, like I say, essentially state-run media, running interference for them. So yes, we can be fooled, and we can be fooled again. We have to be vigilant now. And I got to say something to my friends up in Canada. We love you. We're Willson said, we got an effing more on this president.
All right, do we have another question? How about right here? Yep, that's fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for joining us today. Go ahead. Yeah. I think you've probably got this question before, but over the past year, the Trump administration's taken a much more belligerent stance towards Iran, and they've been appointing some real Iran hawks to government positions, withdrawing from the nuclear deal, despite observers confirming that Iran is not making nuclear weapons. Can you draw any parallels between the situation we have with Iran today and Iraq prior to the invasion, and do you think the same danger exists now as existed prior to that invasion?
That's a really excellent question, and I think that's the second reason that this movie, Shock and Awe, is really timely. I don't believe that the Trump administration is gearing up for a land invasion of Iran, that it will exactly replicate what happened 15 years ago with Iraq. But it's pretty clear they withdrew from the nuclear deal, despite their own intelligence agencies and the IAEA saying that Iran was fundamentally in compliance with that deal, and the deal was giving the United States and the world a better look inside Iran's nuclear developments. I was talking to a former CIA director who pointed out that in Trump's speech withdrawing from the nuclear deal, he quoted Israeli intelligence. He didn't once throughout that speech say anything about American intelligence because it would have said something quite different than what he said. So I think in sum, there is reason to be concerned, and this is something we're reporting about, that there is a growing level of tension between the Trump administration and Iran that will be ratcheted up, economic sanctions and so forth. And again, I don't think there's a war plan, but things like this can go badly wrong. There can be miscalculations. And this fabulous movie that Rob made is a reminder of the cost of the costs.
Fantastic. We got another one. He's already got the mic, I think.
Yes, thank you. My name's John. Thank you very much for a wonderful film. One of the lines in the movie, it was, I believe, a domestic conversation in which one person said, "We need to be a patriot," and the other said, "Well, sounds more like being a nationalist." A comment that you recently made about expanding your sources. During that time, when you're in a domestic environment, you see one thing. Did you find that journalists from foreign correspondents looking into this situation, did you find that they were able to be more rational and able to see the same types of things you were versus like New York Times, Washington Post, things like that?
Yeah, that was me and my ex-wife.
Okay.
So she's from former Yugoslavia. I covered the wars in former Yugoslavia. She worked both as my translator, but also for Human Rights Watch. And we would sort of help each other. I would take her into the war zones and she'd translate. Then she would go and interview victims of human rights abuses, and then I would help her edit her. I would edit her reports. So it was kind of a symbiotic relationship, and I think it's a really interesting observation that you made, and that is that she points out the difference between nationalism and patriotism. I think what we did in that movie was patriotic, and that, by the way, that email with the traitor, Trader, that was real. And John Walcott really did, when I handed it to him, that's all he did, is just edited it. There was one foreign correspondent during that period who also started delving into it the way we were. Didn't get to where we were because he didn't have the sources. His name is Julian Borger from The Guardian. He is back in Washington now after being away for a while. He did write some of the stuff sort of along the lines that we did, but for the most part, I think, Warren refers to it as access journalism, and that means that you don't want to blow your access to the sources who provide you with the information that you put in your stories, and therefore you don't want to write things that perhaps might piss them off, and therefore they won't talk to you anymore. I don't think foreign correspondents have that problem because getting those sources for them is much more difficult and much more limited. It's much harder for them to be able to plumb the kind of sources that we were able to. John Walcott had been in Washington, I don't know now, 40 years, doing journalism in Washington for 40 years. I've been there since I came back from abroad in '95. Warren's been there for
35 years.
There you go. So if you, and what we used to do is I would hear something from a source. I couldn't confirm it from any of my other sources, so I'd give it to Warren or John or Joe once Joe came on board, and then they would go plumb their sources, and we all had different people. We all knew different people in different buildings, and we had the two source rule, and usually we'd want more than 2 sources. And you saw what happened when I insisted on getting more than 2 sources for this story that we were going to report, where we were going to accuse the Secretary of Defense of setting up a secret war planning office with a parallel intelligence apparatus. And I just wanted to be really, really sure, and we lost that story to the New York Times, which didn't get all of the stuff that we had actually had. But for foreign correspondents, it's much more difficult.
Thank you.
You know, I think it is more difficult in terms of getting sources and so on, but just from, you know, an overview of seeing what was unfolding in the United States, I think they had a much clearer picture of what was actually happening, because everybody in the United States was caught up in 9/11 and all of the patriotism, and nobody wanted to go against the president at that time. But you know, we screened the film in Zurich, in Switzerland, and people went crazy because they got it. They got it immediately. They understood it, and I think people in Europe understood this film. I'm sure people in Canada. I mean, you guys were forced in a way, and you didn't even agree with the war, and you didn't even want to support the war, and you wound up getting forced into, you know, having to supply some material and stuff like that. But anybody outside the United States could see that it was idiotic. It was really idiotic what we were doing there.
Right, do we have time for a few more? Perfect. Okay, right over here.
Thank you. Slightly different track of question for Mr. Reiner. Any advice for an aspiring filmmaker trying to get their first movie made?
You know, I get that question all the time, and I used to not have a good answer for it, but now I do. And that is, go make a film, and you have everything you need to make a film. If you have one of these, and you have a computer with an editing you know, thing on it, you can add the music, you can make a film, and then you just submit it to agents, and you've done it. When I was young, you had to, you know, you had to get all the equipment, and it cost money and all this stuff. But you can actually make a film, and once you have the film, you write the script, you get your friends to get in on it, you make it, then you can send it to agents, and you can show, or then you put them in festivals. You make a short, and you can put, you know, Toronto Film Festival as a, you know, a big section for shorts. So yeah, there's an easier way to do it than what I had to do.
There you go. All right, over here.
Thank you so much for showing up in an exceptional film. Not to bring things back to politics again, but we're seeing this in Canada, I think, much more so. But do you think that the media landscape it aligns with the political polarization that's happening in the US predominantly? And if that's the case, do you think that we should be sort of examining the truth of the media outlets through that polarized lens? And does that kind of make the truth more murky because of the objectives?
It's one of the main reasons why we have such polarization, because we've had polarization of the media. You know, once upon a time in the United States, we had a thing called the Fairness Doctrine, which was administered by the Federal Communications Commission. If you were a television station and you wanted to get your license renewed, you had to be able to show that you presented two sides of an issue. And so local news, I remember, you know, growing up, local news, after the local news, you would have someone from the local political party or the mayor's office or whatever present their side of an issue, and the next night they'd have an opponent come on to present their side of the issue. But that was back in the days when the airwaves were the medium of transmission for television, and still are for radio, but for television. And the people own, I mean, the theory was the people owned the airways. These belonged to the people, and the government administered them. Now, corporations own cable. Corporations own satellites. And the Fairness Doctrine went out the window with, I want to get this right now, I think Ronald Reagan. But in the age of cable, you can't do that. And that has helped facilitate this polarization within the media itself. And it's not just on the right, it's on the left as well, with MSNBC, at least in the United States, on the left, and Fox and whoever else, Sinclair on the right. And that has made it actually much, much more difficult for those of us who try to be honest as we can in our reporting, because that polarization gives power to the President of the United States to push this line of fake news. And he can go on he can go on Fox, and I don't remember the last time he gave an interview to any other outlet besides Fox, and pump his lines out, and say anything else you hear anywhere else is fake. And one of the really serious consequences is, look, we're human beings. We do get things wrong. But unlike the President of the United States, we quickly correct our mistakes. We put corrections in the newspapers, or at Reuters we will send out a new version of the story with saying we've got a correction and here's what we're correcting. And so the situation has become much more serious because of the polarization of the media, but also, and that's linked to big money in politics in the United States, unlimited billions washing through our political system. But the polarization of the media is a very serious part of all that.
If I could add on to that just really quickly, I've got 3 sort of simple rules for media consumption that I would urge on this audience and everybody who's listening in. First of all, make it a point to force yourself to read things you disagree with. I will, on more than one occasion, often try to find a conservative or some other columnist in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal that I disagree with, because I'm going to learn something from that. I visit Breitbart once in a while just to see what other people who don't consume media like me what they're being fed or what they're being informed of. So that's rule number 1. Sometimes it's hard because we can all very easily get in our little bubbles and find stuff on the internet that confirmation bias confirms what we already think. So make an effort to go outside that bubble. Number 2, visit fact-checking sites. There's some really good fact-checking sites in the US, and I'm sure it's true in Canada too. People that put a lot of effort into they're not biased, but they try and point out what's true, what's not true. So that's number 2. And number 3, if you read or hear something and it's designed to get your blood boiling and get you emotional as opposed to inform you, that's a big red flag.
All right, I think maybe we have time for a few more. Right here? Right back here. Put up your hand again so she can, there you go.
Thank you. It's a 2-part question. Hello, gentlemen. So the first part is for our director, Rob. Did you encounter any obstacles or any resistance in embarking upon the making of this film or during the making of the film? And the second part of the question is for our journalists, gentlemen, how involved were you in either the screenwriting process or the production of the film? I'm just curious. Thanks.
Well, we did, luckily I had access to some financing because I had done this film, LBJ, just prior to this, and that went pretty well. So I would work with the same financial group, and so, it went pretty good. I mean, we wound up with the cast pretty much at one, except one little thing. We had one little glitch, and that is we had Alec Baldwin was playing the part that I ultimately wound up playing, and we had arranged the schedule so that we could go back to New York and do Saturday Night Live and do Trump and everything. We've been shooting for a week with Woody and Tommy Lee Jones and everybody. And the Saturday before he was supposed to come in on Monday, he said, I'm not doing this. He dropped out. And I was, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I, running around trying to figure out who to play. My wife, who's one of the producers on the film, she says, well, why don't you do it? And I said, oh, wow, I don't know. I mean, I don't like the idea of directing and acting as kind of a split focus. And, but I said, you know, I'm available, so I guess I'll do it, you know. And then the one direction she gave me, because I'm playing John Walcott, you know, the one direction she gave me was try to be less Jewish. That was the only really difficult thing. But as far as these guys, I said at the beginning, they were intimately more about it.
Yeah, in terms of our involvement, I mean, I hope Rob doesn't mind me saying this in public, but Rob and his amazing wife, Michelle, who's co-producer, I feel they're like family to us now. They, from the very start, we were involved at the ground phases of the project. The amazing writer, Joey Hartstone, who's a screenwriter on this, came to Washington and interviewed us and our families extensively. We were allowed to go through the script. We had one 7-hour session at the Four Seasons Hotel in Georgetown in DC where we made suggestions. Be clear, Rob and his team had final veto power, but they listened to us. And then we went down and spent time on the set in New Orleans and made suggestions. And those of us who know our families will see members of our families as extras in the film, including my...
You'll see you guys.
We're in the film. My amazing wife, Lisa, who's here tonight, the real Lisa Strobel. We still are hiking the Appalachian Trail, by the way. She's in as an extra in the film, so we were involved from start to finish. And the movie isn't based on a true story. It is, with some tweaks for Hollywood, a true story.
Yeah, we were involved right from the get-go. I was actually coming back from the Middle East. I had been in Egypt reporting on the end of the revolution there, and then had gone to Jordan. I was hanging out on the border with the Free Syrian Army, waiting for President Obama not to cross his red line and bomb Syria. And I was flying back, and I had just seen The Wolf of Wall Street, which Rob is in. And we land, and I turn my phone on, and there's an email from him saying, "You won't believe who I just got off the phone with, Rob Reiner, AKA Meathead."
I love that show as a kid.
It's a great show. Wonderful show. He wants to make a movie about us, and then a few seconds later, John Walcott emails and says, "Well, I spent an hour on the phone with him yesterday," and then the next day I get a call from Rob, and I spent an hour on the phone with him, and off we went to the races, and we spent literally 7 hours on the first draft of the script. Word by word, line by line. We then saw every iteration of the script as it progressed through the editing process. We spent a lot of time with the writer, Joey Hartstone, who's just a fabulous young screenwriter. And then we were down in New Orleans. I spent 3 weeks down there. The little boy at the table who gets permission to leave the table, my son Noah, who's now 22 and 6'3", was down there doing an internship, and he spent a week on the set with me on the set also, and he gave some suggestions which Rob listened to. There was an American flag on the wall where you see a friend of mine, Phil Smucker, who actually did break the story of Osama bin Laden leaving had left Tora Bora, and there was an American flag on the wall. And Noah came up to me and said, "Would you have kept an American flag on the wall of the little house you were living in?" And I said, "No." And so he said, "Well, you should tell Rob." And I went to Rob, and Rob said, "Take it off," and took the American flag down. That's a little detail, but it's an important detail, and Rob would listen to us. That speech by John Walcott about, if the government says something, the only thing you should do is to ask, is it true? That was something in the middle of a scene, I went up to Rob and I said, this is what John said. I think you need to include this. And they put it into the movie while we were on the set. And it is the pivotal line, I think, in the movie. So yeah, we were involved from start to finish, and it was, as Warren says, it was like one big family. I mean, Rob and his wife made it that way, and you see the results.
So if everything on screen is true, I guess the major question is, were you really stealing your neighbor's newspaper every morning?
So, my ex-wife had just lost her country, literally, had fallen apart. She was a real, her mother was Serb, her father is a Croat. She was born and raised a real Yugoslav, pravi Jugoslavenska, as they would say. And when she was reading the New York Times, she was saying, what is going on here? And she canceled the paper. And in addition to that, because everybody was putting American flags on their front lawns, she put a United Nations flag on ours. And it's in that scene where Woody comes running back to the house. You don't actually, it's hard to notice, but there's the United Nations flag hanging from that house. Now, you know, there was some license here, of course. There was some compression of the stuff we did, of the writing we did, because we needed to get it into the lead up of the war. But as I said, we did 3.5 years of reporting. There's more than 80 stories we wrote. You can go to the McClatchy website, McClatchy being the company that bought Knight Ridder, and they have put together, because they did a showing of the movie in Washington last week, you can go there and find all of the stories we wrote over that 3.5-year period. The scene with Chalabi, Warren interviewed him in Washington, right?
February 2002 for a very unflattering profile.
Right. And I was still in Afghanistan, I think. And I then in 2003, at the end of 2002, went into Iraq, into northern Iraq through Iran, and with the Kurds, and I waited for the war to start, and I interviewed, I saw Mr. Chalabi in northern Iraq, but it was off the record. I wasn't allowed to use anything that he told me, so what we did was just compress that into that scene, but I never lost my temper at him the way he was. But that needed to be put in there to expose the kind of man that he was and what he had done, a con man on a scale that we had never seen before.
Until now.
I was so tempted to say something like that, and I knew you would.
All right, anyone else? Right down here.
Thank you. It's unbelievable in this post-truth era for you to expose something like that was 16 years ago. I'm wondering what you tell your children in this chaos.
What to tell our children?
All three are grown up now.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I have a millennial too, but they still are confused by all of this.
I try to tell them to be decent at all times to all people. We need more civility in the world. I think that's, you know, I know it probably doesn't directly answer your question. That's the first thing that comes to mind. We need a lot more civility. To be open-minded, to understand that there are all sorts of different people in this world of different colors and religions and beliefs and backgrounds, and they all have something to of value. And I think, I'm hoping that sort of outlook will, it's harder to do this sort of stuff when you have that kind of outlook on the world, I think, I hope.
My son grew up in that household.
Mm-hmm.
He's got Croatian citizenship. He spent a lot of time there, learned the language, understood. I took him on a war tour, sort of like on a bus going up from the coast from Split into Bosnia, and pointed out places that I had actually been during the war and explained to him what had happened in former Yugoslavia. He has gone, we made sure, his mother and I made sure he was exposed to, you know, he went down to do Spanish immersion in the highlands of Honduras, where he was running around in the streets with kids who had no shoes and lived in huts with dirt floors. I spent 6 weeks up there. Try to expose him as much as possible to as much of life as he possibly can see, and then inculcate in him what I told all of you. Go do the research yourself. Come to your own conclusions. Don't listen to me necessarily, except if I'm telling you what to do with money, with my money. No, I tried to inculcate as independent a thinker as I possibly could, and I think we've done a fairly good. His mother did the same thing, and I think we've done a fairly good job. He knows to go out and he's got the iPhone and is far more skilled at it than I am, and knows where to go to get information that I had no idea even existed. And so, yeah, I'm hoping that's what he's going to continue to do, to go out and explore for himself and come to his own conclusions, helped, of course, by responsible media.
We should let Rob jump in here too, but real quick addendum to what you just said. I think the way what we're talking about now ties back into the movie is that most of the people who were the architects of the war in Iraq, the Cheneys, the Condoleezza Rice, the Donald Rumsfelds, and their people below them, they had not actually spent a lot of time out in the world. They had not done the Landay. The Landay rule is you can't really know a country unless you're on the top of the mountain having tea with the village elders in Afghanistan or wherever you have been. Yeah, Cheney had been around the world a lot, but he spent all his time in a government jet and then in meetings, then he'd go back. He hadn't been in the military, he hadn't been a foreign service officer, he hadn't been a Peace Corps officer, he hadn't been a journalist, really being out and understanding different cultures. They didn't understand the Middle East or what was going to happen. So that's how it ties back. Anyways.
Yeah.
Rob, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, I mean, just to jump onto what Warren just said, I mean, and Warren and Jonathan and I, we've talked about this many times. I just never understood how these are very intelligent people, Wolfowitz and Pearl and Doug Feith and William Crystal, these guys who wrote the Project of the New American Century, which essentially outlined what America, as the last remaining superpower, was going to do with their power and how they were going to spread democracy throughout the world. I just never understood how they ever thought that somehow, I mean, I understand theoretically, if you could put a another Western style democracy in the Middle East, somehow it would proliferate and help Israel, as we point out in the film, but that's just theoretical. I mean, the reality is you've got, warring, religious factions that have been at war with each other for 1,400 years. And why they ever thought that you could split the Sunnis and the Shia like that and that everything would work out fine, to me was always confusing. And I said, how could they not understand that? Didn't they, and both Jonathan and Warren said they didn't understand it. They really didn't get that. They didn't get that Saddam Hussein as an iron fist was holding all that together, because these were not countries. They were, areas of the world that were carved up after the First World War by the French and the English, and it was just basically holding this together. So the answer is they weren't all that smart, and it's astounding to me that you would go to war not knowing, what ultimately you would wrought, what would be wrought from that. It's just astounding to me.
All right, maybe one more question? All right, let's go.
I have actually two, one a little more longer answer, one very short. Based on the scene at the barbecue when you're faced with the two fathers, whether or not that happened after that, did their perspective on the media landscape change at all? And if it did, are there any lessons in there to help wean other family members off the Fox News teat? And the second question is the shorter answer. Did the Philadelphia paper ever publish an apology?
So I'll talk a little bit about the barbecue scene. That absolutely did happen. It happened pretty much the way the film portrays it. And what I love about that scene is it shows, as I think the whole movie does, how kind of lonely we were, alone. We were trying to say something that going absolutely against the grain of what was being prevailed throughout the United States post 9/11, all this patriotism and rah-rah-rah stuff. And our families, at least in my case, my family questioned at times what we did. Our own newspapers, the Philadelphia Inquirer, questioned it. Our readers questioned it. We got the hate mails and so forth. The White House didn't pay attention to us deliberately. So, yeah, we were pretty, it's a case study in swimming against the stream, I think. I would like to say that, the media consumption of some of my family members has changed, but that would not be telling the truth. I love them anyways.
No, I don't know if the Philadelphia Inquirer ever published an apology. The Philadelphia Inquirer wasn't the only Knight Ridder paper that wouldn't run our stories, or most of our stories. Many of the 31 Knight Ridder papers did not run our stories. Some of them did run all of our stories. But it was incredibly lonely. On the New York Times apology, it was one of my stories that actually forced them to apologize. And this actually happened after this period that the film covers, where I had mentioned earlier that the Iraqi National Congress, using American taxpayer money, had planted fake information in the New York Times and in various other Western media, and I got a hold of a document that they had foolishly supplied to the Senate Appropriations Committee, because the chairman wanted to know, what are we spending all this money on this for this Iraqi group to collect essentially intelligence, and why are we doing it through the State Department? And so to try and answer that question, the Iraqi National Congress, the man, Itifar Kanbar, who was one of their chief representatives in the United States, put together a 6-page document talking about, here's what you get for your money, and we've got all these secret people, we've got our people salted away throughout the Iraqi government in these various positions, and as soon as the first American troops cross the line, they're going to come over, and appended to the back of this document was a list of 108 stories in various Western publications that he said, we've put our stuff in. Oh, God. And I got a hold of this and wrote a story about these 108 stories. One of them was a piece by Judy Miller. She wrote a lot, but there were 2 major pieces that she wrote that had an impact on the drive to war. The first was the aluminum tubes. The second was this story about a guy, she said, she interviewed him in Thailand, who had claimed he had gotten into 20 of Saddam Hussein's WMD facilities, and that he had these facilities, secreted all under hospitals, in wells, under people's houses, and under one of his own palaces. And none of that made sense to me, because first of all, she said this guy was a Kurd. Now, if you know anything about Iraq and Saddam Hussein, he's not going to let a Kurd who are in rebellion against his regime into his WMD facilities. But the second thing she wrote was that that he had a biological weapons lab underneath his palace, his main palace. Now, would you put a biological weapons lab under your living room? I think not. Anyway, so I went to work on this and determined that, in fact, this guy had been produced to her in Thailand by the INC, by the Iraqi National Congress, after he flunked a CIA lie detector test. And I wrote that. And the flags finally went up at the New York Times. And I wrote that as part of this long piece about all of the fake stuff that had been planted in various West, including two Knight Ridder articles. Having seen that, the New York Times published their editor's note. Wait a minute, we've got a problem here. We got to go back and review all of the work that we have done. The only problem was that they put it on page 10.
All right, well, I guess that's it for this evening. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. Go check out some more films at the Oakville Film Festival. Grab a program on your way out. Thanks, everyone. Get home safe.